So today I was really looking forward to you maybe getting into some of the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, and I think you were talking about possibly Thomas. We'd also had discussed
Yeah, I think
before.
you mentioned Philip too
Oh yeah, what
at
it
one
was
point.
it was a couple of them that you were bringing up, and specifically even talking about what adultery really looked like. That was kind of
Mhm.
the theme that was on my heart this morning that I thought I'd throw out at you and just see where the Spirit leads your heart to speak. Because you do it so effortlessly. It's like all of a sudden you get into the flow and it just comes out, and I love it. It's a
Which means you
beautiful
can't
ride
shut
every
me up.
time.
So,
No, no. It means I enjoy every minute of it because it just the way. And I've had so many people that have let or written wonderful comments after our conversations because of how effortlessly you do speak, and you have a wealth resource of knowledge that comes from your heart, and how the Spirit just orchestrates it to flow out. And so I
it's a
enjoy
good
it as
place
well.
to even begin with something like that. That if there's anything
Please.
I know after so many decades knee deep in this, it's that I don't have a clue. But when I say I don't have a clue, it's not self-deprecation.
Right.
It's real. The true humility of being open and
Yeah.
knowing that there's a line in A Course in Miracles that says fear is the opposite of love. Love is all that is real. Nothing unreal exists. I think I paraphrased that,
Yeah.
but
I remember
basically
reading
saying
that.
fear is not real. It's false evidence
Yeah.
appearing real, and using the acronym. But over the years, I realized I couldn't find it in the books. Led me to places, and in the Aramaic especially, and or Hebrew, and or to a lesser extent Sanskrit, only
Right.
lesser extent because I haven't spent as much time with it, or the indigenous languages. They led me there much more efficiently.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, and it's like once I realized it was about being open, the rest just rolls out when I need it, so to speak. 20 years ago, I would just flood people with information. And it was funny because I think of like this one Lord's Prayer gathering I was doing, Aramaic Lord's Prayer, and my friend James was sitting next to me for like an hour and 45 minutes, and he just turned and looked at me and he was like, I have no idea what you just said for the last hour and 45 minutes. And I'm like, really? And he said, but I feel. He's like, I can
Yes.
feel
I can
something.
feel it.
I
Yeah.
feel a shift. I'm
Yeah.
like, well, then that's a compliment to me. It's kind
Yeah.
of like a parable. It's not meant to be understood. It's meant to fry your sockets so that your brain will sort of lay down and take a nap while you can have that direct, non-dual experience.
That's
So,
beautiful. I love that expression. I love that as an explanation of what a parable does. Because,
yeah,
you've been seeing that.
that's from Cynthia Bourgeot. She's an Episcopalian priest, one of the first Episcopalian priests. She said Yeshua's parables were meant to fry your sockets, kind of like a Zen koan. And the first time I heard that, I went, "Oh my God, she's amazing." I think she's out in like Oregon or something like that, but
Well,
powerful
well,
lady.
even in the word, when you look at it written as mem, I think it's mem tov lamed aleph is a parable. So it's Meltha, right? It's Meltha, but the letters have been permutated and flipped just a little bit differently. So you have literally like meth and lo, or met lo. So you have like the word for death, and then you have this word that means not. And it's the same gematria as Meltha.
Yeah, isn't
So
that
it's,
amazing? Just the
yeah,
slightest little,
just
it's the
slight.
roots that lit me up. It was actually the
Yes.
root sounds, and it's funny because I remember speaking of meta
Mm-hmm.
when like the whole Facebook thing happened a few months ago.
Yeah.
I'm looking at that going, you dopes, sure you may have done your trademark search, although they didn't do that well. There's several companies that had actually trademarked Meta in several different places. You guys didn't research the meaning very well.
No.
He thought it meant like everything together and or to transcend separation, and in some sense that's there in the root. But really, what it meant was basically the end. It meant basically the end of something. It meant the end of the end of a code, the end of you could almost say matrix, the end of a parable, the end of And all the parables represented that, here we're going to talk about the world in a way that you can't understand. And your brain goes, what? And it kind of shuts down. And then you
Right.
have that sort of mild death experience in that. But bless Zuckerberg's heart, he doesn't even know what day it is. In a way, he thinks he does on some level. And I know I don't normally criticize people publicly, but just bless his heart. That's all I can say.
I totally
He'll
agree.
he'll he'll meet himself somewhere down the line.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
And I say that
And
as we use his stuff all the time. So
I know.
yeah,
And I am grateful for that because
yeah,
that's allowed me to connect. I mean, I've been able to connect to you through that and some amazing, wonderful people. And hence why we went to Crestone last year was to be able to meet our friends.
yeah,
We met them using those tools. So, it's being able to find the balance of the tools and what they provide for us instead of them, ruling over us and us not
the
having the
addiction.
ability to be a sovereign. Exactly.
Yeah,
They are
or the
highly
the al
addictive.
the algorithmic behavioral modification. But we're off that subject now. Let's get back
Yes.
to what we were yeah talking about. So yeah, I mean, you know, the looking at like the sort of the Gnostic Gospels. I just say Gnostic texts. There is no such thing as Gnostics, of course. It's kind of like the Egyptian Book of the Dead. The Egyptian Book of the Dead is a misnomer. What that actually is this modern compilation of all these different Egyptian resources, as opposed to something like the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which was pretty much a pure sine wave from beginning to end, written in one piece. So Tibetan Book of the Dead, that's kind of more accurate. But in terms of like this lump of Gnostics, or this idea that people have that Christianity came from a source and went like that into all these myriad forms. And it's like, in truth, that solar Messiah idea has been here for thousands and thousands. It was there for thousands of years prior to Yeshua. And what was actually happening was there was this convergence of all these different people writing about this Yeshua, this Jewish Messiah. Funny enough, at the same time as Apollonius of Tyana, who's heard of him, and all these different people. There were dozens of solar messiahs at the time of Yeshua, and those all started to coalesce around the end of the first century. And you start people like Irenaeus. Anyway, after that coalescence, that's when the Gospel of Mary most likely popped up, probably in the second century, written in Greek. They have pieced it together also from some Coptic fragments. Lots of it's missing. That's why I call it the holiest of all books, because it's just riddled with holes from beginning to end. And it's like they talk about, four levels. Maybe that's the four elements. Who knows? But it's so frustrating that it gets to this place and you're like, oh my God, here it comes, and text missing for the next, 12 lines. And it's like,
Right.
oh. But
Right.
if people ask me a lot, if I could see any text, what would it be that I haven't seen, the actual original? And for a while, I think I thought it was the Essene Gospel of Peace, if it really exists in the way that Edmonds Kelly actually proposed. Because I'm not fully sure about that, in the sense that he represented that being in the Vatican Library, because nobody else has ever seen that one. But it would be the missing parts from the Gospel of Mary. It's the Gospel of Mary, or the Gospel according to Mary Magdalene. In truth, it's another one of those Mary ones, and it's obvious when you read it that it's Magdalene, because it doesn't read as if it would have been Mama Mary,
Right.
and or one of the sisters, or Mary of Bethany, whatever. Um, there's some really profound stuff in there, and it also shows Peter as being um, Peter the Pope. I almost want to call him. He's kind of like the president, and I'm not saying that because of the State of the Union last night. It's like you have that sort of public relations person that's up front, that you give them the task of the administrative duties, but even often they may understand not the money part, that was Judas, but
Right.
he may understand the business of it. But I think the subtler points, I think they were a little lost on him. And of course, he felt threatened by Mary. Uh, Women were subservient, second class women, regardless of what
Yeah.
people want to whitewash that as today. It was the truth. It was a
That's right.
patriarchal society, and there was most men were misogynist.
Yep.
And I'll be honest, in a lot of legs of without mentioning the religion, it's the same way, actually,
Yes.
where women
Yes.
are having to cover up because, of course they say it's a sin to be prideful, but women can't even show themselves. And the actual reason for that, if you actually study that, is because men can't handle the sight of a woman. They can't process that. So shut off the stimulus rather than find transcendence within the self. So
That's
yeah, but
amazing.
Gospel of Mary goes beyond all of that. And if you read it analytically, you will get buried in the first three lines, most likely. Like you're on the first page and you'll get immediately buried. If you read it, like people, I think a lot of people, bless their hearts, they don't, and I don't mean it as any kind of a judgment in a bad way, but I think a lot of people don't know how to read a Gnostic text. And the more problematic part of that is there's no system for reading Gnostic texts per se because they're all so incredibly different, and they're not, they all have a different meaning. They all have, different points. Some of them are huge hodgepodges, like the Gospel of Philip, of all these, even Thomas in a way, of all these things that don't seem to go in any kind of order, and they kind of mush them all together. But Mary is one of those rare ones that really has a stream of thought that moves, and that's what makes the missing pages so frustrating for somebody like me. Is because, wow, we've got this real sine wave of consciousness here, and huge chunks of the wave were removed. It's like having like Stairway to Heaven, and somebody removes the verses, or somebody removes like the verses and the bridge, or they take the guitar solo out and the intro, and you're just listening to this amazing piece of music and having this transcendent experience, and then all of a sudden it's silent for a while. So maybe the silence has a meaning in that sense, but I don't think so. I think it's just missing. um, it's powerful though. I mean, we can go in any direction with the Gospel of Mary in terms of,
However, what you're feeling right now in the moment, because
well,
honestly, I haven't read it. For me, I've
it's
had
short.
many
You
people
can
talk
read
to
it
me.
quickly, but
Okay. I've had many people bring up the Gnostic texts, and, I've shied away from them. Part of it was from my religious upbringing as to why I didn't. The second part is that I am so enthralled and have such a desire to really dive deep and experience the Hebrew and Aramaic that every time I see something translated into English, my thought immediately goes, what was left out? Right. Because there's so much that is missed in these terrible translations, but I know some of it still bleeds through.
yeah, I have I have frustrations of, there's a few people that I really like. Marvin Meyer as a translator, Willis Barnstone's another. Marvin Meyer is the guy that you'll see him behind things like the Gnostic Bible, the other Bible, the Nag Hammadi Bible, all these different, which is another misnomer, Nag Hammadi Bible. There's no actual Bible. It was just literally mass amounts of fragments in clay
Right,
pots. But
right.
funny enough, found by a kid named Muhammad Ali. Well, not a kid really, but a shepherd, a Bedouin named Muhammad Ali. So a boxer found our sacred texts in a cave. Funny enough, was looking for things to burn and toilet paper, and was throwing rocks down into a hole. And he heard one of the rocks hit some kind of pot, or something went crash. And it went down there, and a lot of people may not know this backstory. He took it back to his family. They were burning a lot of the fragments, these
Whoa.
fragments. They were using it as toilet paper.
Wow.
Yeah. And then an antiquities director in Jerusalem, or in Cairo, first got a hold of them, and then one from Jerusalem came across, and was, basically the way the story goes is he came in and was just like, stop, where's everything at? And they had picked him up, busted him into little pieces. Funny, I saw in Raleigh, North Carolina, maybe 12, 13, 14 years ago, the Dead Sea Scrolls came. And they, funny enough, like, because of the, I don't know if you know about the owners of Hobby Lobby, and they buy all these sort of biblical era, like different kinds of like texts and documents and items, etc. And they had bought some ultimately fraudulent ancient text, which is a pretty common thing. And when they started investigating that, they realized that some of the Dead Sea Scrolls that were actually on tour were forgeries,
Wow.
including some of the ones that I saw in these glass cases where you can't even lean on the case or all the alarms will go off. It's funny, my friend Steve was outside and the guard tells me, don't lean, don't da 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 da. And then Steve walks up and walks through with me and he didn't hear all that. And I walk in there and he's leaning on the cases almost like it's a jukebox and he's looking for Patsy Cline, he wants to play crazy or whatever. And I'm like, "Whoa, stop." I'm like, I don't want to go to jail because you're
No.
leaning on the but wow, even it even gets through to that level, the forgeries. But Mary Magdalene, I mean, if you go into the text, I can even pull it up because, like, right before we got on, I pulled it up just to, like, it starts right off with, "Will matter then be destroyed or not? The Savior said, all nature, all formations, all creatures exist within and with one another, and they will be resolved again into their own roots." So it's like immediately, it's like your brain's going,
What?
"What?" Yeah. Um, and it requires, for me, it's so dangerous. I'm just going to be blunt to read a Gnostic text analytically.
Yeah.
And if there's any thing you must do, it's to be in a truly open, almost meditative state.
I would agree.
And when you get there, it's just like it's just like the scriptures. But I mean, it's what was it? Ron Roth used to say, not just as medication as a feel good thing, but as meditation, and
Exactly.
to be in that space. And when it's sort of like when you've got your toes dipped in eternity, in the way that I say it, you see the things that you're not going to see, that your analytical mind can't pick up, and you won't make mistakes on a lot of things. But in the end, it's kind of like so much Gnosticism is like the book of Revelation. Even when you boil it down in Greek or using an Aramaic text, boil it down to the absolute base, it's still a metaphor. It's still coded.
Yes.
And like I've said before, when you realize John was banished to Patmos, which is covered with amrita and psilocybin mushrooms, magic mushrooms, you start going, okay, maybe it's not as sort of human prophetic as much as it was just a little bit of a trip for him. Who knows what it is, and who knows if he even wrote it. But the Gospel of Mary is interesting also because it's basically Peter challenging Mary, almost like saying, "All right." He doesn't say streetwalker, although he does in some places of the Gospels, basically harlot, one who gets around town. Um, he's basically like, well, since he gives you all this private information, tell us something that he said, which is a challenge.
Hmm.
And it's interesting, she basically relays the information. It goes through, and at the end, of course, is it Levi that challenged and says, this is without going too deep into it. At the end, 3 pages. That's why I say you can read it quickly. It's just your brain is going to be fully invested. Andrew answered after Mary said this, and this is after all kinds of amazing things happened. She fell silent since it was to this point that the Savior had spoken with her. But Andrew, okay, answered and said to the brethren, "Say what you wish about what she has said. I at least do not believe that the Savior said this, for certainly these teachings are strange ideas." Now, that to me, number one, that's saying, okay, if these are strange ideas, then what that's telling me is he's not looking properly. He's not seeing. He's looking at the codes. He's looking at the movie on the screen, basically. Peter answered and spoke concerning these same things. Now, here comes the misogyny. He questioned them about the Savior. This is Peter. Did he really speak privately with a woman and not openly to us? Are we to turn about and all listen to her? Did he prefer her to us? So I'm going to
Wow.
pause on that for a second and jump over to Philip. And that Philip is the one where it says Mary Magdalene, who was called Yeshua's companion, who he used to kiss often on her. And the translations, well, the translations usually write mouth, but the word's actually missing.
Oh,
It's rubbed out to the point where it's almost broken out of the text. People hope it's mouth, and it probably is mouth, but who knows? And then it goes on and it says, "Why do you love her more than us?" And this is the disciples asking Yeshua. And his response is, "When a blind man and one who sees are both together in darkness, they are no different from one another. Yet when the light emerges, the one who sees will see the light, and the one who is blind will remain in darkness." Which
oh,
is essentially his way of saying, because you guys don't see.
exactly.
You don't have eyes that see. And it's
Right.
kind of like the idea of the eye of the needle. I put a video up on YouTube just a couple weeks ago about how the word for eye in eye of the needle is chruria, which it means emancipation, but what it literally means in ancient Aramaic is to free a slave.
Mm,
And what are we enslaved with? We're enslaved with the world. And just
exactly.
reading on here in Mary, it goes on after that and it says, "Then Mary wept and said to Peter, 'My brother Peter, what do you think? Do you think that I've thought this up myself in my heart, or that I'm lying about the Savior?' And then Levi answered and said to Peter, 'Peter, you have always been hot tempered. Now I see you contending against the woman like the adversaries.'" Now, pausing on
Mm,
adversary,
mm,
uh, that, essentially the word Satan means adversary. What it literally
right.
means is a being divided against itself. Satan wasn't an actual. People don't look. Maybe they just don't know enough about the older languages. They don't look deep enough to realize that Satan is basically a code name for a person that's divided. That the good them is fighting the bad them. The not good enough them is fighting the too good for everybody else them. The superior them, etc. And it's a changing cast of characters in your life. So when he says adversaries, it means people that aren't whole, aren't full.
Right.
"But if the Savior made her worthy, who indeed are you to reject her? Surely the Savior knows her very well." Now, these are the last couple lines. That, I cross referenced Philip. Now we're coming back to this. "That is why he loved her more than us." You can think of the Philip line. Why do you love her more than us? "Rather, let us be ashamed." And here's a big piece here: "Put on the perfect man."
Mm,
Levi, bless his heart, saying "put on the perfect man" is literally telling me that he doesn't understand what Jesus truly taught him, that you're going to put on the perfect man, as opposed to, like, the word garb. We say garb. We all, wear our clothes and we call it garb, especially in the 20th century. Well, garb comes from the Aramaic word garba or garbta, which literally means to hide. And it was the word for skin in Aramaic, garb or garbta. A lot of no modern people know that, basically. But uh, so put on the perfect man, separate as he commanded, and preach the gospel. Now, here's another telling thing: not laying down any other rule or other law beyond what the Savior said. Now, if he's telling them don't put anything into it, that's another way of him saying you guys don't see it. So just parrot what I'm telling you, because your eyes aren't fully open. And when they heard this, they began to go forth and to proclaim and to preach. Well, obviously, if he gave Mary these deeper teachings, he didn't feel that she was asleep. He didn't feel
no,
that she was trying to put on the perfect man.
no.
He didn't feel that she was, going to go out and add something that wasn't awake. And when you really start going deep, not into the Gnostic Gospels, or Gnostic texts, I should say, and you really start digging into Magdalene and going back to what looks like a pretty convincing connection to the Isis priestesses of Egypt, all of a sudden you start realizing, wait a second here, maybe it wasn't 99% Jesus, 1% Magdalene, but maybe it was 50-50, and maybe in some cases sometimes it was 99% Magdalene, 1% Yeshua, and that turns the entire church upside down. But that's what needs to happen, because the
Exactly.
church was built on BS, on belief
Exactly.
systems, is what that means. But
Well,
you start
that's
looking at
interesting
the
that you're
text,
talking about that,
it's
because
there.
I was actually digging out this morning about I was in First Corinthians, just doing my morning wherever Spirit was leading me, and I was looking at, first of all, the mind of Christ, because that's a very interesting phrase when you see it in the Aramaic, and then into Hebrews, where it was talking about the meat and the milk, and the difference being where we are at in being able to process these things, exactly what you were bringing up about some of these deeper things for those that are ready for the meat. I use that loosely because when you dig in and you see what the word is saying about that in the letters and the frequency in the Aramaic, it's so much deeper than what we on the surface level translate. So I can see that. And I could also see that Mary Magdalena, that she would be able to bring and sometimes be able to teach Ishu or Yeshua as he was teaching her, because that's the way that our relationships are supposed to be. My husband and I find that, especially when we're digging out the languages together, he'll
Mm-hmm.
bring things to me and I bring things to him. And it's a beautiful harmony. And sometimes those proportions change depending on what
Oh
is
yeah.
going on. But then it's to bring the balance between us, not only in here, but also within our own marriage. And I haven't found anything else that does that. I really haven't. It's a beautiful blueprint for that if one in a relationship makes room for it.
Yeah. And humility must be there. Yeah.
Absolutely.
That would actually take us right into the idea of adultery. And,
Perfect.
since we're talking about Mary here, I can
Yeah.
pull a little earlier back in the text, and it says, Peter said, since you have explained everything to us, tell us this also. What is the sin of the world?
Mm.
The Savior said, there is no sin. So interesting. Just right there, it's like, where does Christianity stand if there's no sin? See, now, but funny, like Karen King, who I adore, she's a great scholar. She says that sin in Gnosticism is the spirit mixing improperly with the physical. And I love you dearly, Karen, but that could never be more erroneous of a statement, because there's no difference between the two, in the sense that there's no two to be in a relationship. Now, that might sound weird, but we're going to go deeper into that. There is no two of anything, not in truth. I always use do I have it here? The light. Oh, here it is. I don't know how good the battery is, but my light
Oh,
pen,
you're
and
light.
it's like, well,
Yeah.
yeah, there's 9 billion people on Earth, but really there's only one light, is the truth,
Right.
refracted.
Right.
And sin is essentially, in Aramaic, it just means mistake. In the
Right.
Greek culture, I used to teach, that in the Aramaic culture, it was an archery term. And then when I started looking deeper and deeper and deeper, I found out that people have been teaching that wrong. It was actually a Greek thing with the archery. So now I've got stuff out there that says, this is the thing. You learn after years. A lot of time, I wake up every day trying to make the person that I was the day before look like an idiot, not consciously, but just I'm always open to learning and
Yeah.
proving myself wrong in that
Yeah.
sense. And it doesn't happen. I don't want to say it doesn't happen very often. My big head. I don't mean it that way, but when it does, I do what I can to calibrate that out there. But sin is essentially believing that what your brain is telling you is real. And that's the word mammon, mamuna. Money was a possible example of mamuna, but says you can't serve God, which means the absolute, the only, the undivided, and mammon. Mammon is the belief that everything is separate,
Right.
that everything is, all these things in relationship, but truly enough, when you look deeply enough, there's no actual relationship, such as, if I pull a battery out here, interestingly enough, out of my little light, there's positive and there's negative. Now, what person on the planet can come up and show me where it changes from positive to negative? Is
Right.
there a brilliant person on the planet that can do that? No. So why would that be? Because they're interpenetrated. Okay. And people will say, like, God is everywhere present. And I'm like, okay, what does that mean? Where everywhere and everywhere you go, there's God. And I'm like, finish the statement. What are you saying? It's all God.
Exactly.
And the reason that you can't find the dividing line is because it's not two energies, it's two qualities of one singularity or continuum. And when you spoke of your marriage with Ken, when we're in that center, when we're in that ripe, fertile place, it isn't just one stagnant location, which is
Hmm.
why beliefs written on a page can be dangerous, because they're written on a page. Unless you're able to change your perception of what's there, or life in general, and then the needle kind of moves like this as to where the midpoint is. Where so I'll pull up a little
While you're
example
pulling up,
here.
I'm going to say that one of the things that I had always said, and it's definitely, I could feel it in my heart, is that with Ken and I, that my heart was that you would never find out where I ended and he began, or where
That's
he
awesome.
ended and I began, because we would be able to move back and forth in that flow, in that unity, without in it being seamless. So
Yeah,
that's what has always been my heart, for us to begin to really share and with other people, but just live it and experience it and be it, and not have a striving, not have competition, which has been a lot of shadow work that I've had to do. And I'll tell you, when you get to that point and you experience it, it's such bliss. It's so amazing. And I know you know that with your relationship.
absolutely.
So
Yeah, people are like, God, you guys have been married 24 years. You're so lucky. It's like, roll up your sleeves, get to work.
exactly.
Lucky.
Yes. And most of that has to be right here.
Yeah.
It's right
Yeah,
here.
truly.
Anyway.
And occasionally one or the other will bite the hook, and that's fine, you
Oh
know.
yeah.
Um,
We need those catalysts though.
yeah. Well, that's what, ultimately the transcendence, what was it Einstein said that, basically the solution to the problem is, you can't find the solution with the same mind that created it, but in the same sense, the solution's within the problem, if you can even call it a problem. But yeah. Is sharing on? I don't know if I tried it yet. No. Can you turn that on this?
Probably not. Let me go
I'm
over
going to show my
here and
family
do more.
vacation slides. I'm just kidding. Here's
Let's
Jimmy
see. So
drinking a
if
soda
I make
outside
you
the
the
store.
host, if I make you the host, then I think that allows you to do that. Okay, try that now
I am a host now. Okay, good.
and see if that'll allow you to
So
screen share.
Bing.
Yay!
Now, of course, we call it the yin yang, the yin yang. Technically, this is called the supreme ultimate from the I Ching. But, people have this idea that it's two energies in relationship. And the reason the dots are here is to say that this is within that and that's within that. But it's not exactly what's going on here. The truth of the matter is that this is a continuum, like a battery. The battery is probably the most perfect example that I can think of, where you look on one side and it looks positive, masculine. You look on the other side, it looks negative, feminine. And of course, what are we told not to look at? The negative. So what are we told not
Right,
to look at? The feminine, which
right,
means the shadow. And it's been
right.
happening for thousands of years, and we have this mispersaken, new word, mistaken idea today where the positive is good and the negative's bad, which
Hmm.
is not true. We should be
No,
using words like empowering and disempowering, or integrative and disintegrative. Positive and negative. The positive is the arc of electricity, like a serpent. That's the masculine, and the feminine is magnetism. She nests in upon herself. When you bring these two together, you have the electromagnetism that's referred to in a lot of Gnostic texts, and the place where they come into perfect balance is called the bridal chamber,
of course it would be.
interestingly.
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to sort of pop back off of that text. And what it says here, in Mary, it says, there is no sin, but it is you who make sin when you do things that are like the nature of adultery, which is called sin. So I probably should have just kept that up when I said that. But so what is sin? What's adultery? Adultery is the belief that this and this are not a singularity, that somehow these are two different things.
So it's
Adultery
separating.
is the belief that the sin is that, okay, the world is real. That's your sin. That's your mistake. The actual adultery is thinking that the world is that fake world is somehow separate from the absolute with which it's projecting from. And what we have to understand is the only way we see the world is through our lens, and essentially, of course, through a lens darkly. And if there's anything we need to be doing in our lives, it's cleaning the lens.
Exactly.
It's essentially, and that the adultery is somehow any level of not just the man against the woman, but believing that things are somehow separate. To believe that there's more than one game in town, that's adultery. And if you look in Mary, the Gospel of Mary, it's so clear, because it says, he continued and said, Well, that is why goodness. Now, there's no word for good in Aramaic. It said in a lot of these texts, it says good. And I'm like, no, 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 no. The idea, if it's coming from Yeshua, good doesn't exist because good comes from the Germanic good. And what that means is to put two things next to each other and compare them. And this one is somehow good and this one is somehow bad. But what that word would mean in Aramaic, taub or tub, like ripe soil, fertile soil, it means ripe. And what that means, ripe and fertile, is that it's fertile now in this present moment, meaning that it's rich in the moment. It's not an idea in the intellect, in the head, in our thoughts, etc., which is where the sin is. It's believing what's in our head. But that's why not good, but goodness, ripeness, fertility came into your midst to the essence of every nature. In other words, the separation of all these things in our head to restore them back to their root, which is that they're not separate, back to the root of wholeness. Then he says, that is why you become sick and die, because you are deprived of, most translations will just say the one who can heal you. But when you look at that on the surface, it's like, oh, Jesus can heal you, or some outside God can heal you. But what that word that was translated as one really means, and it would look weird in a text, so I understand why they wrote one, but one's not exactly correct. It would be closer to the word only. You are deprived of the only, not only one, just the only or the absolute, which can not even heal you, but help you realize that you were never sick in the first place. In other words, our belief in division is what causes the sin, the mistake of dis-ease. That somehow these two different things have to come back together, but they've never been separated. That's why
Right.
in marriage it says, what God hath not brought together, but created as one, threaded through and within each other to the point where they're actually not two different things. Let no man put asunder. That doesn't mean you can't leave your spouse. That has
Right.
nothing to do with it, because adultery, when you see it even in the Gospels, isn't about a man and a woman, someone cheating on the other. And divorce has not, so it's just a really horrible reading of something that earthly people, bless your hearts, I love you, they didn't understand.
And look at how much that has infiltrated that misunderstanding and has been weaponized and has
Oh,
beat
totally.
people up. That shame and that guilt, especially if you find yourself in a relationship that is incredibly abusive. You know,
Absolutely.
I've endured that myself, and finally, you know, I couldn't endure it any longer because I became hospitalized. So I mean, and I endured it because I was believing in those Christian foundation principles that I couldn't be divorced. And how insane is that?
Yeah, and the foundation principles are built on, I'll be honest, they're not built on anything. They're not
Right,
built on anything accurate, sadly.
right.
And that includes, like, I meet so many people that'll call themselves modern Essenes sometimes. And what's really weird about it is not only are there so many translation errors, which is just everywhere, um, but it's like they have these like shiny sort of modern whitewashed versions of who the Essenes were, who were actually quite incredibly ritualistic. They were very, very funny thing. They had a very intense dogma for initiates for the purpose that you could only basically squeeze through a little straw of dogma and come out the other side. And there was a purpose for that. There was a reason for that. I understand why they did that. Basically, we're going to put your head in a vice. You know, we're going to squeeze you like Moe would squeeze, you know, Shemp's head on the Three Stooges, like squeeze it in the vice, that kind of thing. Maybe it's not the best example, but we're going to squeeze you down, get you as thin and pliable as we can, get you stretched as thin as possible. But like what's weird is when you look at modern people that are seemingly parroting these Essene, the realization of what we really know about the Essenes, it becomes this like sort of modern new agey thing of specialness, you know, and
Right.
they dress like wizards and all this stuff. And it's like
Well, you know,
the
that goes
exact same
back to
thing happens with
separateness, though.
Magdalene. What's that?
It's the same thing that happens with that separateness again.
Absolute. Well,
And so
that's the
now
issue. Is that
we have the sin as the separateness,
yes?
as the ego that has to have a title.
Yeah.
And it's like, it seems like to me, everything that Ken and I have been looking at is that it's like the validation of mother teaches you so you can understand where you're living in a system of duality, so that you can see it clearly, so that you can neutralize and invalidate it. So
Yeah.
there's validation of mother, invalidation of father will get you in that place of oneness without having in separation. And then you won't miss. You'll be right where you were at, one with all. And so that religious, that spiritual ego, let's use another, edging out God or edging
Hmm.
God out, you are separating yourself from the absolute, the essence of the unseen that is everywhere and in all things. And so, yeah, and it's dangerous. And the other thing that I see in this process is you get these writings that you're talking about surface level, or you have somebody that has that experiential knowledge of something, and they're trying to convey something that is very deep. Someone will pick up on it, their ego will pick up on it, and then they begin talking about it as if it really is theirs, that they've
Yeah.
experienced it. But yet everything in their life shows that they don't. And so it's sometimes at those points where, even when Ken and I are sharing things, how much do we really want to release? Because I don't want to keep, I personally don't want to have a religious ego. I'm in that invalidation stage. And when it rises up, and I don't want to be able to, I don't want to be one of those that puts that information out there, that somebody picks it up and now they're speaking something, and it just creates more of a religious ego. I mean, it's a good mirror for me. It truly is a good mirror for me.
To be careful in the Tao Te Ching, be careful handling the master craftsman's tool lest you cut your
Ooh,
hand.
ooh, that's good.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
very good.
it's ego it's the Greek word and it means
Yes, it is.
individualized self. Ego Amy, I am. It's funny, like
Yep.
Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. It's like that's a nice statement, but it couldn't be more incorrect. You know, thinking, what, and you put that next to Shakespeare, there's nothing good nor bad, which is basically what Yeshua was saying. There's goodness,
Right.
which is a radiance, a flowing of fertility, as
Yeah.
opposed to good and bad judgments.
Right.
But Shakespeare said there's nothing good nor bad, but thinking makes it so. Well, thinking, we're sort of, who was it? Was it Victor Hugo that said we are doomed to make choices? I know Wayne Dyer said it, but he was quoting somebody else. So it's like, not necessarily that all thought is sin, but in a way it is
Right.
because
I
it's
hear
it's a
that.
judgment and people, that's
Yeah.
how we got to this new age concept of your thoughts create your life. It's like your thoughts don't create anything. Your thoughts are the effect of what you feel. Now when I say
Right.
feel, I don't mean emote, but
No.
that pure sensation of frequency and vibration. And when you focus on that feeling before you ever have a thought, you can have a feeling.
Hmm.
And that will crystallize into a thought, which is something you can kind of look at. And they've been, IBM, Marcel Vogel was taking pictures of the waves that leave the mind when you think a thought back in the 70s, for God's sakes. So they think, oh, thoughts create life. And there's, like Earl Nightingale, I love him. He was great. You become what you think about. And it's like, no, no, the character, the actor you are in the movie becomes what you're truly feeling, not thinking. It's funny, like it's like reframing prayer.
Right.
People, if you're praying for the healing of Ukraine, stop. If you're praying for, like, well, then what am I supposed to do? Your prayers are not your words. Your prayers are not what you're
Mm-mm.
thinking. Your prayer is
Mm-mm.
what you truly feel. So if
Hmm.
you're sending out these waves, or you think you're sending out waves of praying for Ukraine, what you're actually doing is you're in this state of sadness and you want that state of sadness to end. You manifest in Latin. Manus festus means as obvious as manus, hand. Festus, obvious, as obvious as my own hand. It means obvious. Your prayer isn't the words you use. It's not the thoughts you're having. This is why Yeshua talked about the Talanach, the secret room, the closet. Pray in your closet. You already feel it, and the Father already knows what you want before you speak it. And what you speak is in. He literally said it's incongruent with what you feel. So the whole point. So then, what do we do about Ukraine? See them in vibrant spirits and joyous
Exactly.
health. See
Exactly.
them in absolute with the rays of the sun on them, happy, and
Feel it.
that's exactly it. And you
Feel
have
it.
to, on all levels, And that will actually rescript your thoughts. And so it's
Exactly.
like, regardless of what people are saying, it's like, that's not your prayer. And he said it over and over. Don't do what the publicans do and go out in the square and blast these words out, because what they really feel, what they really know, and the true, the heart of their being, which is we're feeling, is truly happening. And it's sad. I've seen in some Arab people that translate some Aramaic, they would translate liba, heart, as source of thinking. And it's like, no, it's not source of thinking. It's source of feeling.
Feeling.
And again, not emotion. It is it's literally that source of the sensation of ding, pure frequency. I've got bowls
Right.
all over, but they're out of
Right.
reach. So,
Right.
and it's your
And
initial feeling, that's feeling before you
yes.
think, oh, I like that sound or I don't like that sound. It's like I can, like, even pull a drum out. I've had situations where I pulled a drum out in front of 30 people and they saw this drum, and then I would hit it one time and I had like people occasionally flip out. And it's like, it's an interesting thing. I'm like, just from the sound of a drum. I had this amazing green heart chakra crystal bowl, got it from China. My first show on the road with it was in Kalamazoo, Michigan, my first event. And I literally just hit the bowl and a woman fell out of her seat and was like flailing. And everybody's trying to save her. And I'm like, no, no, that's flight of the spirit. Just let her be. And she thanked me after. She was like, thank you for the safe space for me to be able to do that. Because anywhere else, people would have thought that I was possessed by a demon or
Exactly.
something and tried to
Yeah.
force me out of the room.
Right.
So we really got to get in touch with that. I'm doing my best to get what prayer really is out there. Like, a lot of people will say, like Greg Braden does great stuff with his
Yes.
Essene modes of prayer stuff. There's a couple of things that aren't quite there. Like, he'll say, like, that the people, there's this one video that you can see, and there's a tumor, and they're looking at it on the screen in this hospital, and these people are praying over it. And the way he's saying is that they're saying already healed. And then you literally watch the tumor shrink. But that's not accurate. It's not already healed. You're affirming the radiant health that they are. If you say already healed, you're still implying
The
disease.
disease.
If you're
Exactly.
if you talk about the law of attraction all the time and you tell me you're manifesting a car, then what's obvious to you? I don't have a
That you
car.
don't have a car.
If you
Right.
use the word attract, that's the funny thing about the law of attraction. It's real. But if you use the word attract in the sense of something that you're attracting, you're affirming your lack, and that's what
And
attracts.
that's exactly.
You don't
Thank
get what
you
you
for
want, you get
correcting
who
that.
you are.
Thank you. From
So,
here, right here.
yeah, the high heart. Yeah.
Yep. And that's why I love the beauty of a lot of the Eastern philosophies that we've missed in the Western culture, is that when they share much of their wisdom, it is coming from the inner man, and it's coming from that emotional place of experiential knowledge in that which they share, which then bypasses this. And I so appreciate that, because that's something that for my own healing journey, I had to get into the place of allowing myself to feel without judging from here. Because the brain, the ego is always saying, well, what is this? And trying to figure it out. And I need to put a term to it. I have to have it something concrete. And it's like, that's what we're trying to bypass.
Hmm.
That's what's stopping all the flow of all these precious gems, of all this wisdom that we are holding in here. All of us have it.
The label is the death. The theology is the death. And I'm not saying theology doesn't have a purpose,
Right.
but it's never going to be anything more than a finger pointing at a moon. And, even the moon is a metaphor. Even the
Yeah.
moon is a theology. What is
Yeah.
it? Rumi talked about, theology, that hypocrisy, that trick of the mind.
Yes.
And he's like, if you need your addiction to theology, wrap your beautiful robe of words around you and sleep. Rumi was well, that was Coleman Barks's translation of Rumi. But yeah, it's amazing. If there's anything that I hope, when we do retreats, like Loretta and I are going over I'm going to be speaking in Glastonbury and uh, Abergavenny, Wales next month in April. We're
Wonderful.
setting up for a retreat that we're doing in Glastonbury in September. And what's interesting, like our retreats, the whole point of the retreats isn't tons of information. It's stripping back of the information and getting people to the open space and to get to the place where, like I say, what does it really mean to be spiritual? Well, if ruha is spirit, ruach,
Hmm.
that frequency and vibration, how can you enter a room basically with what I call the cosmic question mark above your head and enter the room curious without the addiction to labeling, without the addiction to naming? Call me by
Yeah.
my true name, which is a great, Call Me by My True Names is a great Thich Nhat Hanh poem that I wanted to record back. I wanted to film it back in December because I was reading Being Peace for the 33rd time in my life. I actually have slash marks on one of the copies. I've got a few copies of it. And then he ended up passing. And then I'm like, oh, I should have filmed that. But then it's like, no, when I did film it again, where I did finally film it a couple of weeks ago, I haven't put it out yet. It had this whole different dynamic to it of, basically affirming that one of the primary teachers of my life was now gone from this realm, and watching the funeral procession and seeing his body, live on the internet, laying on a table while everybody was coming to pay their respects, and then watching them literally burn his body. And it's like, and he's like, I am a continuation, like the rain is a continuation of the cloud. And it's like going
Oh,
through all
yeah.
that. So it had this interesting vibe to it, but it was all about Call Me by My True Name, this poem, because he was of course working for peace in Vietnam during the Vietnam War. Martin Luther King nominated him, Teak, for the Nobel Peace Prize before, right, literally months before MLK was shot down.
Mm.
But these young girls and stuff were writing to these different monasteries and saying, look, these sea pirates, here we are, refugees, that you guys are trying to get us out of the country, and these sea pirates keep seizing our boats, and they're raping the young girls, who are then going and drowning themselves in the ocean. They're committing suicide. And at first Teak was like, oh my God, we have to attack the sea pirates. And then he went, whoa. And he was like, if I went through the exact same life that the sea pirate went through, I would be exactly the same person. And then he was like, how can we hold them accountable without trying to make them pay for something that I'm not willing to feel in my own heart? So I am the young child that's raped, and I am the sea pirate. And again, it doesn't remove accountability, but it
No.
happens from a place where it's done in awareness and it's done in consciousness. It's not done with the adultery or the sin of believing somehow that the world is real, but being
Right.
able to realize that you're in this world, though not of it. It's a far different place to be. And that takes me back to right where we started with how to read a Gnostic text. Don't read it with just your intellect. You look at, there's different, Yalda Bayoth, Demiurge, if you want to really understand them, study Carl Jung, or some of the Valentinian Gnostic stuff. These people will, like, a good example of a mistake would be believing that that is a set of beings or people that are somehow against us, but Yalda Bayoth and the Demiurge are the collective unconscious of humanity. All you have to do is read the texts. But if you look at them intellectually on the surface, you're going to see some kind of whatever, extraterrestrials, other planetary whatevers, and I'm not saying they're not there. But if you look and see deeply, you realize, hold on a second, this is all like the evil in the world is fed by our own fear. And that's where the power comes from, which means that it has no power in and of itself. Does that mean it's powerless? No. Does that mean it's not maleficent? No, it's quite malicious. And I've been in the presence of some pretty dark, like, even thinking about it, beings in my life. But once I removed the roots within me of fear, they went away and they don't come back anymore.
Exactly. Exactly. I'm really glad that you brought that up. I've had some struggles with people that have projected Yelda Bayoth and those external stories as external narratives and whatnot. And in here, it's never sat right with me. There
It's
was
a
a
finger
gentleman,
pointing at the moon, yeah. And I
yeah, instead
understand
of
it.
like,
I understand, but
that's within me. That's within me. That whole story, that is my journey. That is all
and
about me. And so,
all of its power comes from my own resistance, my
Yes.
own idea. Let's put it this way. Gandhi said there's no devils in the world except there's no devils running around in the world, just those in our hearts. And they're literally, it's not necessarily just that it's a projection of me, but it's a projection of all of us in one big clump.
Exactly.
And I mean, it was actually
Exactly.
my deep, deep study of Carl Jung, and listening to a lot of his old lectures translated straight out of, is it Dutch into English, that I went, whoa, like holy God. I was forming all these things in my head, not just with Gnosticism, just the world in general. And I started learning about archetypes with him, and people will go and study the archetypes, and they'll say, "Yeah, that's this archetype, that archetype," and it's like, no, you missed his teaching entirely. What he's saying is we're going to continually create our own archetypes, but we're going to basically what we're doing is forming these characters in a movie on a screen that's not there, and all of that. Yeah, I mean, I think if people look deeply enough, they'll get through that. I don't know that I ever had a point that I felt that they were separate in that sense, or some kind of beings or legion or something. But I did have a period, I'm going back 30 years, where I was like, something's like, there's something coded here. And when I kept going deeper and deeper, and that comes from Midrash,
Hmm.
essentially all the different places where they pop up, lay all the texts out on the table and start going, okay, what do all these things mean? Because a lot of that stuff was written in Greek or even Coptic, so you really
Right.
can't bring it down to a root, because if you boil
Mhm.
the Greek root, you just have a couple of letters sitting on the page. There's not really much meaning in roots for Greek, but
Mm-mm.
um, and then I started going, hold on here. And then I started conferring with some other sort of Gnostic masters. And they're like, whoa, they're like, yeah, they're like, funny enough, that's what I've been feeling, but I didn't have a way to put it into words. And I'm like, well, maybe it doesn't have to come into words in that
Well,
sense. But
I was always in processing some of this stuff. It makes me wonder if sometimes the reason why people aren't able to get to those deeper levels is because they haven't learned to tap into the depths of their own selves. Like their life is very surface oriented, the way that they're living, the way they've oriented everything, that depth of the unknown produces too much fear, and that ego just can't handle it. But those of us who have read the text and have had it begin changing us, we go, oh, there's the way. Oh, we feel it, that openness when it starts happening. And it naturally makes us want to continue going into those deeper places. And so as soon as you start doing that, it changes your perception of the text.
oh,
There's something
really,
there that it opens up and you go, oh, wait a minute. Oh, wait a minute. I was missing it the entire time on that surface level. There is a much deeper call that is calling me to go deeper within myself. And so now every time I read and look at it, I can't help but go into the unveiling of the mystery of me and the collective as we're walking this thing out together, as within, so without, in the micro and macro levels.
change the way you see the world you see changes, or change the way you look at the world you look at changes, I believe is what Dyer said. But I've never called him Dyer before. But yeah, well, it's yeah, and I think it's even more immediate than that, in the sense that if we can just get ourselves in fully in the presence of the moment,
Yeah,
anybody can do that. And I've said
yeah,
this, as crazy as it may sound, someone can, like, cancel the thought. This guy that was estranged from his wife and murdered his three little girls yesterday at a church in Sacramento, and then killed the caretaker that was there because there was a restraining order against him, and then he killed himself. It's like, that's a really heavy thing. But it's like when you start looking deeper, even like, had he not, and I'm not, I honestly, I'm like, look, dude, if you're having those kinds of problems, and I'm not encouraging suicide, but just,
right.
you know, if you can't handle it, turn it on yourself. Don't turn it on other people, for God's sakes. But my point is, like, even somebody that does something as heinous as that, and I'm not saying they're totally absolved and have reached redemption,
Right.
they could walk
Right.
out and have a holy moment on the street, right then, and heal the sick. That sounds crazy, but it's like, what I'm saying is it's all about the present moment. That does not absolve his past. It would not, it doesn't include any of the atonement or the accountability for what happened. And so I'm not saying that in that kind of sense. What I'm saying is all it takes is one moment of being open. It doesn't require, if there's anything 30 years of study did for me, it was that I realized not just that it wasn't in the books, but it was a little deeper than that. The books were pointing toward now.
Right.
They were pointing toward now is really what that is. And
Being
some
present.
languages I think embody that a lot better than
Mhm.
others, and some don't embody it at all. Actually, some don't. There's languages that don't have a word for now.
Hmm.
That's an odd one,
Oh,
But
it is. Well, and you know what? I love that because as soon as you bring it up, I'm thinking about Hasha, Hasha, and you were sharing something about really not resisting the fire. When you resist the fire is where you have the issues. And with Hasha, hey, Sheen Aleph, you got the fire right in the middle, and then you
yeah,
got the spirit breath, the exhale and the inhale, and the fire right in the middle now. And so it is beautiful to be able to see that because, of course, the depth in the letters themselves of what that now moment looks like and not
yeah. I mean,
resisting your
it's
now
the- it's
moment.
it's the light of God,
Yeah,
and yet when we resist that light, we create. And that light of God is also a fire. In the
exactly.
resistance of that, we create the fire of hell,
Yep.
which is the resistance. It's still the same light, but when we resist, we suffer. And it's
Mm-hmm.
it's exactly why Jesus said in so many places, people think I've come to cast peace, but no, I've come to bring war, fire,
Yeah,
stone, sword, and war, to have
right.
3 against 2 and 2 against 1, and each of them shall stand solitary. All he's talking about is stuff within not 3 people in a house. Like, the house is me. The
Right.
house is each and every one of us, and the 3 and the 2 are all the battles within ourselves of the good me, the bad me, the religious me, the theological me, the evangelical me, the Methodist me, whatever it may be,
Right.
all of that
All those
stuff.
other
And he's
egos.
saying, look, I want you to see how many personas you have within yourself and
That's
stand
right.
solitary as a witness to the insanity that you've created in your world. And I can only
Yeah,
do that with a light that's so strong that in its initial stages, because we can't handle that light, it feels like fire. And
yeah,
it's like, what? So look, the light of sun was represented as the light of God in ancient times. Well,
right.
what happens when you move closer to the light of the sun? You burn.
You get
What
burned.
happens when
Right.
you move closer to the light of God? People will say, "Oh, I'm seasoned and I transcend and all this other blah blah blah." No, you burn. Why do you burn? Because there's still something within you that believes that you're not that light. And that's
Exactly.
why you resist, and that's
Exactly.
why you suffer.
Exactly.
And Jesus talked about it over and over in the teachings. And yet there's people, bless his heart. I love Bart Ehrman. He's done a lot of great stuff, but he wrote a book called Why We Suffer like 10 years ago, talking about how the Jesus teachings don't really, the Bible doesn't touch on why we suffer. And I'm like, unfortunately it does in Aramaic. It just doesn't in the Greek. And
Mm-mm.
even in the Greek, there are some layers. It was like he didn't quite understand the text that he was writing about fully enough.
Well,
But
it's
that's
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 why
fine. That
the
actually set me
fullness,
off, like looking, okay, why do we suffer? And I'm like, well, here it is,
right.
here it is, here it is.
Right.
It's
And you can see
resistance.
it all over the place. And that's why even the word Sheol, when you root it out, it's like you're even just in the definition of the word, when the definition of about you're seeking answers, you're questioning things. And when I began looking at it, this was one of the biggest breakthroughs for me in breaking out of dogma, religious dogma, was when I looked into hell and Sheol and Gehenna and all those things. It
Hmm.
just, as soon as that my eyes were open to it, it was like, oh my gosh, I need to keep going. Because if this is a lie that I have bought into that has terrorized myself, when it's actually the place of inquiry,
Yeah.
because you got the sheen, I've got some fire going on from God. I'm being burnt right now. And I don't know why. Well, then you have the Vav within that's like saying, connect to your heart. Your answers that you need are here. You are burning because there's something that needs to be dealt with, and you're asking questions, but you're not really looking for the answers because they're right here. Stop resisting it. Stop trying to figure it out up here and get in here. Find the answers in here, and then you won't have the suffering. And man, that whole shift, just looking at the letters, looking at the definition, It changed my whole perception and how I needed to set aside all of that religious indoctrination and begin to look at everything new. And as soon as I would get triggered with an indoctrination, because I'd read something, it's like, thank you, Toda Rabah, thanking the spirit, the Ruka, for revealing those things. Because the bondage doesn't need to stay there
And
anymore.
people that are
It's time,
asleep, people that haven't seen it will
right?
literally attack.
Oh, they do.
They'll
Hell,
attack.
here's the crazy thing, and I know you know this, and it's like I was baffled when I was starting getting attacked with some of these things that I was bringing forward because I'm thinking, what what is it about you that wants to have a place of eternal judgment and torment for another? What is that really saying about you here? That you are desiring to have this place still exist,
I
that
would
these
say
bad people are going to go so
it's
that you
probably
can get
revealing,
justice?
like, if I'm going to hell, so are you, is what I think it is on a certain level. It's almost like a personal acknowledgement. If somebody's wishing eternal hellfire on someone, I would almost think it would only be a personal acknowledgement that on the deepest level they believe that they're going to go through that and they want to bring somebody
Potentially.
down with them. I don't know what
Or
else it could,
there's
but
so much pain and suffering in something that they went through that they have to have justice sought because it was so terrible. Unless,
welcome
like
to the
you were
penal
just
system of
talking
the
about,
United States,
right?
the
But you were
privatized
the
correctional
privatized,
system.
exactly. But you were even talking about that with the child and the rapist, is
Yeah.
being able to see both sides of it. And when you can see both sides of it and be able to neutralize it, then all of a sudden you have such love and compassion that that desire for that adjudication process to happen and have them burn, you stop, you cease to that, because then you recognize those elements you have within you. It changes the whole perspective. And so
Totally.
when I hear somebody get into that level of judgment, I realize that they have a lot of fire that they're dealing with, and there's a lot of unresolved. And it gives me much more compassion for their walk instead of going, whoa, and then externally judging. It's like, you know what? I love you, and you just need a great big hug right now. You just need to be hugged. That's what you need. You
Yeah.
need love. You need compassion.
Hmm.
That's a huge key.
It's exactly 11. Oh, it was 11:11
Rakam.
until I said it. Now it's 11:12. But for you, it's 3 hours earlier. So,
I know, it's all good. Well, I don't want to keep any
yeah.
long. You've already
No, I didn't
blessed
mean
me
it
with an
that way, but yeah.
amazing amount of time. But yes, 11:11. The rakam, that the loving kindness, it's a huge key. It's a huge key. And for me, if I have it in here for myself, then that's what we can manifest on the outside. And that's that prayer space in here. And so I appreciate everything that you brought out today. I think you hit some really strong points, and I really look forward to people listening to this conversation of things that you've shared. And
You know,
I
it's
know there's
interesting,
much more.
like loving kindness, metta in several Eastern languages means loving kindness. It means the opposite of what it is in the Semitic line. So, may you be
Crazy.
well, may you be happy, may you be peaceful, may you be loved.
Yeah,
Yeah, but that's two T's. I don't know. It's an English transliteration. So,
of course.
anyway,
Well, I thank you for your time today. Toda
absolutely.
Rabah and the namaste. I look forward. I hope we can set up another interview, and maybe
Totally.
we can start engaging the Book of Philip some more. And
Oh,
I'm sure
definitely. We
there's going to
barely
be some
touched
other
Mary,
ideas.
too.
I
That didn't sound
know.
right, but
I know what you're saying. Well, let's next time in a month from now or so, let's start
okay,
digging deeper in them. I would love to do that. I'd love to do some
cool.
deep divides and see where Ruka leads our conversation, because it's always very inspiring for me, and I know that people love to hear what you have to share. And so, can you let people know how they can find you again? I don't always
Yeah,
say
well,
that, but I want
just
to make sure.
DaleAllenHoffman.com is my website. Definitely sign up on the email list because we always send out free stuff. But YouTube is my main megaphone. Although I've been so busy lately, I barely put anything up any like the last few weeks. It's like I've got all this stuff filmed. It's just a matter of getting it up.
It's the
But
time.
yeah, YouTube,
Hmm.
Facebook, Instagram. But
And
yeah,
your book.
that you can get on Amazon, the book. So
Yeah, I
yeah,
just got this here not too long
totally
ago, so I'm going to start diving in that as
cool.
well, because I know that I always have much more to learn, and you always stir me up in a really good sense and make me want to continue doing what I'm doing and to push through and just to keep going.
Awesome.
To
Yeah, the
echo what
book
you
starts
said
out
last time.
The book
Just keep
starts out
going.
very conversational, like how I got into doing this and experiences I had. Then the middle gets really sort of midrashic, and then the end is toning. So it's like there's a story, and then there's I'm going to dunk your head under the water, and then we're going to put it into practice kind of thing.
I
So
love that.
maybe
I
that's
will
not the
say
best
that I skipped a
explanation.
little ahead and I was looking at Better Sheet, and I loved what you were sharing with Better Sheet, because that first word in our sacred writings that we have called the Bible pretty much sums everything up in the very first word.
Yeah, well, they say that it's in the first letter. And it's funny that
Yeah.
the first letter is not written. The aleph is not written. It's just
Mm-mm.
implied. And then it's in, so you're in English, you're looking at the B, let's just say. And if you can't
Right.
find it in the B, you find it, or if you can't find it in that part, the in or in within through all that, then you're going to find it in the beginning. If you don't find it in that, then you're going to find it in the first verse, the first chapter. Uh, and that would be great if it was truly all inspiring on that level. But there's definitely places where you can tell some whatever self-righteous man wrote it down, and you'll see like a really inspiring text, and then you look at the either the gematria or just going down to the letters, and all of a sudden you'll see it go stagnant, mathematically fatal, as Stan Tenen would call it, and then all of a sudden it wakes up again. And it's funny when you look on that level, you can see where humans put things in that didn't have deep enough. It's like the absurdity in the I just made this Holy Spirit video a few weeks ago, and I forgot to mention that in the King James Bible, the holy is lowercase and ghost is
It's
capital G.
capitalized.
I'm like, how
Noun.
stupid could that be? The word that's totally wrong because you're trying to make it into a ghost that you see is the word that you capitalize, which makes you wonder, it just makes me wonder.
Well, listen, I've actually said to many people, I said we need to stop nouning things.
Yeah,
Because if we
totally and
actually take a look at
completely.
that frequency and the resonance within the word itself, the totality of the essence of that will then begin to speak to you instead of externalizing it as something outside of you that you are not.
Yeah. What you're
So
looking
go back
for
to
is
sin,
within.
right?
Yeah,
It's like,
totally.
stop nouning it. Just stop nouning it. Just read it completely different with no nouns and allow it to speak to you through that. But then again, you're going to lose a lot in English if you do that. So
Yeah.
it's like, start digging in the other languages. You'll find out a lot more. Well, Dow, thank you.
Awesome. Bye.
Much love to you. Ahava. Shalom, shalom. Namaste.
Bye.
Bye.